Good morning, everyone. My name's Candace, and it's my privilege to kick off this webinar on driving agility in the digital workforce. And so I am privileged to be joined today by the esteemed Alistair Shepherd-Cross, founder of Teamit.com, co-founder, and Michael Loughlean, Associate Director at Accenture. And today we're talking about driving agility, and we had a lot of conversations about what are we even talking about when we're talking about agility. And the fact that we had such a robust conversation around that made me think about where to even start this conversation. We were so excited to see the variety of people and roles who registered for this webinar. We have VPs of people, and we have CTOs, and so and everything in between. So thank you for registering for this, and thank you for spending the next 45 minutes or so with us in this important conversation. So the statement that I read, which I ran past both of you, that it was like a record scratch for me, where I was like, whoa, I need to think about this, and I feel like I need to talk about it too. Your company has 21st century technology, mid 20th century management processes, all built atop 19th century management principles. Michael and Alistair, either one of you can take this. Why is this a problem, and why is this such a big deal for us to contemplate, and how do you see this show up?
Michael, far away.
Well, the challenge to that statement, Candace, is when you say, how does it show up? Because it shows up in sort of a number of different ways, doesn't it? Depending upon, and not really depending upon industry, but depending upon sort of degree of adoption or what you're struggling with. And so when I look at how it shows up around teams and teaming, we've got a bunch of folks who now come into a workforce and just can't fathom that companies would still be using these archaic approaches, or what they deem to be archaic approaches to accomplishing work or organizing around the work. And that's a real clash, right, of what leadership styles we would have seen previously and the leadership styles that are now required. And then I think the other is just the pace at which folks are attempting to try and get work done, whether this is pandemic related, as we mentioned earlier, and this massive disruption that's happened to how we accomplish our business, or it's just market driven, and what's happening within the market and the drive to change that has us stressing out these old structures to the point where they're failing. I mean, they can't move at the pace and speed that they need to. And so we're sensing it there as well, right? With this absolute sort of overwhelming feeling that you can't get the work done.
Alistair, anything that comes to mind for you there?
Michael pretty much hit on most of all the points there. But yeah, I think it's just that the mindset of the new employee and the fact that the power has gone into the hands of the individual these days much more than the company. People have so much more choice than they've ever had, and I think it's happened so quickly that, again, I think companies have struggled to kind of keep up with that amount of change, and how their actual employees have changed over the last, essentially 2 years. And so, their expectations and demands on their either new employee or their current employee that they were with them pre-pandemic have altered significantly. And if companies aren't able to keep up and move with the times, which are moving very, very quickly, then we start to see attrition. They talked about the Great Resignation. We've all talked about that, but we're really seeing that start to happen now, that things are starting to open up in the market. And I think people are feeling more confident about kind of where things are at with the pandemic and the future. So they're feeling confident about kind of cutting ties with their old employees and employers and heading out on their own and trying something different. So, I think, it's just this imbalance between kind of old ideals and old management and the new world and the expectations that your employees have of you.
But, you know, it's interesting. Both of you, we're 7 minutes in, and I'm already off script. But both of you use the words struggling to keep up, and that on the one hand, companies are struggling to keep up, but also, I mean, Alistair, you bring that perspective, which is so much a part of your day to day as you talk with candidates, just about that struggling to keep up with what's happening in the world. And you know, certainly we know over the last year and a half or so, then if there were archaic processes, then those became starkly evident. But why do we struggle to keep up? What's the problem with our processes and with our organizations as you see it?
Well, to be fair, we're going through unprecedented change. So I don't think it's a bad word. You shouldn't feel bad about struggling to keep up. I mean, it is a reality that, you know, we've all been thrown a major curveball, and so I think we have to be kind of good to ourselves in some respects, and not too hard on ourselves to feel like we're somehow failing because we're not keeping up. You know, when was the last time anyone who's listening here feels that their whole life is in balance? You know, you get little snippets and little moments in time where you think it's under control and it's in balance, but you know, rarely do you feel like, you know, it's all running smoothly and you've got it handled. So I think you know, I think it's more around mindset. It's to have this agile mindset, this mindset of it's okay, you know, constantly looking to where you can improve things, where you can embrace change, and not, you know, set these long-term goals where, you know, which if you don't hit, you know, and they, you know, they're out of date in a matter of, you know, 3 or 4 months. So I think the mindset, it's more of a mindset, and it starts right at the very top of the organization. It's this sort of curiosity, you know, happy to kind of look at new ideas, happy to embrace change, and not be scared of it. I think that is the key. So, you know, those are scary things for some organizations. Some organizations are better set up to embrace change. You know, companies that perhaps had a remote first strategy when they first were formed and established were able to navigate the pandemic relatively easily because they were already working from home and fully remote, and their processes were geared that way. Other organizations weren't, and it's not their fault, you know, and so for them, it's a lot harder to switch an entire workforce to having an agile mindset. So just because they're hearing, oh, well, this company's doing X, Y, and Z and seems to be flourishing and we're struggling, that's okay. I mean, you know, as long as your mindset is that we need to move with the times and change and be curious, then that's, you know, you'll get there in the end. It's just, for some organizations, it's just going to take longer. And their business is such that it doesn't necessarily fit an agile sort of, the pandemic is harder on certain businesses and organizations than others.
Well, but it's hard on them all. I mean, to your point, right? When we say, you know, has it really been easier for digital natives? Not really. Yeah. Digital natives, I mean, come on. I mean, you know, that's all I ran, right? Was a digitally native, pardon me, organization. And yet now suddenly I wasn't able to do morning scrums with people present. I wasn't able to walk the boards, to see the work, to, you know, to create collisions where they needed to happen. So it was even hard there. So I can imagine firms that, you know, didn't have either, and now we're trying to, you know, to build that up. I mean, the impact of it has been different on different folks. I always come back to, you know, we talk a great deal about organizations as if they were, we sort of anthropomorphize them. We make them into these people. Oh, if organizations could only think this way, if organizations could only, you know, feel more trusting or take more risks, or all these things, but they're not. They're corporations. They're built by processes and org structures and all these other pieces. How does it feel to people? Because I can tell you as a leader, and I'm not young, obviously, but, you know, I look at leaders in sort of my age and above who are being asked to run agile teams, and it's freaking frightening as hell. So now suddenly it's going to move faster than you've ever seen it move, and you feel like you have less control.
Yeah.
That's called chaos to most people in older leadership thinking, right? It's like, oh my gosh, how could I possibly keep this thing on the track? And what you're saying, Alistair, that I think is fascinating is it's not about setting long-term goals, it's about setting epics. It says, we think that here, somewhere out there, we want to attain something that looks like this. And that isn't strategic planning, not as we've always known it with the old structures. It's not nearly as concrete as what we would have liked. So now, think of it now, I'm going faster. I feel like I have less control, and I don't have a concrete idea of where I'm going. What does that sound like? You know, I can't imagine for some of these folks what it must feel like, right? Yes, you can get into the groove of it. You mentioned balance. Balance is not a thing, it's a verb.
Yeah.
It's something that you're constantly working to maintain. There isn't a state of balance where it's like, oh, it's all going great, that lasts longer than 5 minutes. And when you're now juggling numerous teams, as you know, more and more senior people are doing, that sense of balance feels like it never comes. And so there's a sense of overwhelming about that sometimes too, right?
So you talk about epics, and I mean, both of you are talking about, you know, just the importance of this mindset. If somebody's listening to this going, sounds good, but where do I start, and how do I do this? What are some of your? I know you've done this, Michael. Could you tell us a little bit about how you have helped teams or organizations bring principles of design thinking, Scrum, you know, start wherever you like, but tell us a little bit about how you've done it.
It's painfully. I think the first trick is to not try to do it with those that don't want to. I always like to say that you have to search out the coalition of the willing. And in those, then you can attempt to try and do some different things. And I think it's pockets of stuff, right? I really think it's pockets of stuff. You know, design thinking is a fascinating one. People always say, well, you know, we're not in consumer goods, or I don't have a retail sector, or I don't have a, you know, sort of a clear customer that I work with. So how could I possibly do design thinking? And switching that on its head a little bit, turning it around and say, well, everybody's a customer of something. What is it Dylan says? You know, we all work for somebody. And I think, you know, figuring that out, and then just, you know, attempting to use more of a human-centric approach to anything you might be designing, whether that's designing a service, you know, internal or otherwise, and really just reaching out and finding some partnerships with folks who have the skill sets that you don't, so that you can try it legitimately, as opposed to, you know, I read a book on the weekend and now I think I'm a design thinker.
Yeah.
It is a discipline. There is a master's degree in design that involves all of these things. And so, you know, bring those kinds of new skill sets onto your team to, even if only temporarily, to try this out and do it. And then the other is, I've always said, you know, just beginning to track work. Scrum and the use of Scrum, for example, is easy to implement, quite candidly. It's difficult to get your head wrapped around, but it's not difficult to implement. And suddenly, I love it because it's so, well, it's performative. You know, you're there. It has ceremonies. People are together. You know, and you're sort of constructively trying to change the way. If you go about it and stick with it, you will see results, which I think is also fascinating for folks. They want to feel like they put energy into something, that something comes out of that energy. And so in many cases, doing something like Scrum is fascinating. And it helps with that feeling of that loss of control. You know, you know, my name is Michael and I'm a micromanager. I think, you know, there was a time in my career when I certainly felt that, and Scrum solved it, because it allowed me to see all of the detail I needed to see without having to pick at what people were doing, because I could see the work visually.
Yeah.
I could organize the work as I needed to, so that they, you know, I was almost prioritizing. So, you know, grabbing some small pieces is a great way to get started, and those small pieces will yield quite interesting results quite quickly.
Well, and as you're talking, Michael, I'm reminded of so Teresa Amabile is a very well-respected researcher on motivation, and so what her a big body of her research showed definitively is how motivating progress is. And so, you know, I almost feel like it's kind of anticlimactic to state that, but she proved it. How much of our, and it there's so many different ways that we can look at helping people to experience and to see and to track progress. But Scrum is such a no-brainer in terms of time, helping people to see, you know, for this sprint, this is what we're going after, and then we're gonna have the ceremony, we're gonna celebrate, we're gonna look back, we're gonna look forward, and to create those cadences and those rhythms and those processes and ways. But the effect is that people get those opportunities to celebrate. You know, in more traditional, going back to our quote at the top of the session, you know, so often some of the traditional processes that we have says, once a year, we're going to look back on all you did, or frankly, because of recency bias, we'll probably look at what you did in the last month, and then we'll talk about what I think about it. And how motivating is that? It's not, right? And so when we even think about keeping people motivated on an ongoing basis and having that opportunity to look back, look forward, and learn, and have that learning orientation. And it's you know, there's a case to be made.
Well, so many good things go right just by doing Scrum. And Alistair can weigh in on this one. But I mean, you know, we hear teams now a lot, individuals even more specifically saying, I no longer feel connected. I don't feel connected to my company. I don't feel connected to the teams I'm working in. I don't feel connected to leadership. I'm here, I'm in this environment and only this environment, and I feel so disconnected. Yet Scrum, the last organization that well, I shouldn't say that, should I? One of the organizations that I brought it into, you know, very shortly after having arrived, it became obvious to me that I had a series of really smart experts that were doing a body of work, but doing so completely individually. And so 2 weeks after starting Scrum, I had the team come to me, not an individual, come to me and say, we've never felt like the team we feel like today. We know what each other are working on. We've been able to help and assist each other. We see obvious synergies between the work and you know, all these other things. And they just hadn't felt that. And I think in times like these, and I look around, you know, in times like these, wow, just to be connected again, that every morning I have a ritual to speak with my teammates and tell them where I'm struggling, where I might need help, what I'm hoping to do today. And those things, I mean, it can bring folks back together again, right?
Yeah, I think it's that cadence, like that regular cadence. People need to be brought out of their shell a little bit and be forced a little bit to communicate, because there's a lot of, you know, if you're an introvert by nature, and in our industry, in tech world, there's a lot of introversion, and so when people were forced into the office, they were sort of forced, in some respects, out of their comfort zone. Their default is to kind of work quietly on their own and maybe be less sort of social. And so when you have that taken away, that and they don't no longer need to do that, they're more likely to revert to kind of being more sort of inwardly thinking potentially, or you know, less sort of social. And so the idea of Scrum, which kind of brings everyone back together, you know, every day they got to do a stand up, they got to talk to the team. I think it makes it kind of keeps them kind of connected. I mean, I had a term I was talking to Candace about it the other day, about what I call creeping apathy, which is this, you're not depressed. No one would necessarily know a major change in you, but you're just sort of quietly running at sort of 75%, because you're not doing the things that you lose this motivation because you're not around people all the time, and it's easy to kind of get sort of sucked into that world, and it kind of just creeps up on you when you're working at home away from the team. And so you have to be, I think we all have to be very aware of those types of things that are going on in the workforce. And I think the longer this goes on, this sort of working from home and the pandemic, I think the more this, the novelty of working from home was kind of exciting for people, and it was all new. And but a year and a half in, we're kind of, it's now just the norm. And I think it's easy to lose sight of, how do you keep the teams motivated and connected?
Yeah, that leadership drift is deadly, right? I mean, I've had folks who would literally say to me, I haven't had the whole team together, really even spoken to them in months.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm thinking, how can you do that? I mean, I'm talking to them every morning.
Right. I mean, you think about when I remember when it first came, when it first started, I was super energized and excited. I mean, I kind of still am because I'm a big believer in distributed work. But everybody I was talking to was like, "Yeah, we've started up yoga classes, and we're doing all these cool things to keep the team together." Well, how many of these things are going on now, 18 months later? As you call this leadership drift, it's because now we're into this sort of, I say, the drudgery of work again, and so how do you keep that front and center all the time? And I think you're right about Agile and Scrum forces you to do that a little bit each day.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Hey, Ange, would you mind putting up the slide on? I'd like us to talk about VUCA. And VUCA. So VUCA, for those who haven't heard of VUCA, VUCA is a concept that emerged.
Not an East African dance at all.
No, it is not. Although it does sound like it, doesn't it? So I hadn't even thought of that. So VUCA was a term that emerged actually post-Cold War. So it's been around a long, long time, and it was a term that was created to capture how people were feeling at the time, and so Cold War times. I was relatively young then, but I remember feeling just the tension in the world about the world felt kind of scary out there, but it was we couldn't see it. We couldn't touch it, and I think about what VUCA meant then, and how it applies now. But there's this, there was also a movement more recently to talk about the solution to VUCA as being, and they called it VUCA Prime. So the solution being, if things are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, where we can't quite touch it. It's not concrete. And it's complex, we can't totally put our finger on this is the problem that we need to solve. And so, I have this mixed up Rubik's Cube that I pull out a lot in when we work with teams, and I have it because, first of all, I don't know how to solve it. I'm not one of those people, and my kid mixed it up. But I love it because these are our organizations. It's not straightforward, and we have to kind of spin it around and look at all the sides before we just start turning stuff and expect that we're going to solve it. And so, so the solution, that's been proposed is vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. So we've been talking about agility, but when you think about, either one of you take this, when you think about VUCA Prime these days, how might this provide some direction for organizations right now? When they're thinking about, say, the next 3 months, what are some things that occur to you that people could be doing?
Wow. So first off, don't throw VUCA out for VUCA Prime. VUCA is still fantastic. I use it a lot differently, though. It's become the criteria by which we understand given problems. So what is the degree of volatility that we see within this problem, or variability that's in this problem? To what degree is it ambiguous? And so using VUCA more as an indicator, right, as opposed to being the problem. Yeah. From that, then, I like the mapping to Prime, because you start taking about, do I actually have a vision? Do we know what we're trying to attain or accomplish with, when it comes to solving this particular problem? And so you can still use it as a way of adjusting what's there. I think what's fascinating, you have your Rubik's Cube. I look at VUCA, what comes out of it then gives me some idea of what I'm dealing with, on some kind of a scale. And then that helps me understand the people that we're going to use. And the analogy we always use is the snow globe. We understanding that level out, me to know which people I'm going to put into that snow globe, so that then I shake it up and I get this thing that is going to try and solve something in a totally unique way, and or the best possible way, thanks to inclusion, thanks to diversity. And so what can you do to start going is start breaking problems down to understand where they might fall into this, and then the small team you're going to put around that and put into that snow globe to try and solve it. I think it's weird, we tend to think big problem needs big teams to solve them, and that's been proven wrong through organizational psychology over the last sort of 15 years, most certainly. And so think about the key folks. I want to go back to, one of my early mentors once said to me, and I very much appreciated her for it, when she said, don't put your best people on your biggest problem, put them on your biggest opportunity. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but the subtlety of it's quite fascinating, in that it's about you always want to grow and move forward. Yes, sometimes problems need to be solved, and in many other cases, they need to be left behind, right? You need to move to the next thing. And VUCA is all about trying to solve that sort of upcoming thing, right?
Alistair, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I look at, understanding is so critical. Where you look, looking at it from a recruitment HR perspective, for example, like, where we talk about retention, for example, like really understanding what is the issue, like what are the core challenges around that particular issue, which is really front and center right now. And, and critically looking at the way you used to do things to where you have to think about doing things in the future to kind of keep up with this ever-changing workplace and workforce. And so I think, obviously, when we look at, one of the key things is onboarding. That's a huge issue, onboarding people into an organization. And it's one of those things that it has such an impact. Like, it's shown that if someone has a bad onboarding experience, they rarely recover from it, and they don't stay within the organization. And so, within 6 months, they're gone on to the next thing. And so, you really have to have that, you have to identify these key challenges that drive behavior within the organization that are detrimental to it, and it's just a very fast-changing environment, and we're seeing organizations, for example, with onboarding. I know I go on about that, but it's super important, that have changed their processes to meet the modern workforce. They're having so much more success when it comes to retention, and I look at that as a key component.
So, Alistair, I know you get to sort of peek in the drawers of a lot of companies. So, either because you're recruiting for them, or because you're speaking to talent that other companies are losing. So, what do you see are some of the biggest mistakes that some companies are making right now?
Well, onboarding is one. For sure. I kind of touched on that. I think micromanaging is a big challenge, because a lot of the leadership, they just don't have experience on how to run remote teams. It's not their fault, again, because they were leading pre-pandemic, and people were in the office, and so now that we have remote workforces, leaders have been forced into this, whether they like it or not. Some leaders are naturally good at it, some aren't, and so I think trust is a challenge, and I think individuals, your quality people, resources, they want to be given an opportunity to grow and make decisions and have some autonomy. And I think organizations that micromanage, I think that really does turn people off. There's lots of tools out there now that are used to track performance, track activity, track all this, what people are doing. And I think, I think candidates and employees feel they're sort of being micromanaged and watched all the time. And I think it's, I think that is an issue within organizations. I mean, I hear that from candidates quite regularly. There's a fine line between being given that autonomy to do the work and be trusted versus, someone who's looking over your shoulder all the time.
And it reminds me of the conversation that we had just a month ago with Mary and Tom Popendick, where they were talking about outcomes versus outputs.
Right.
And so I think there's different kinds of micromanaging as well. And Michael, I love that you're a professed, self-professed micromanager. But when the micromanaging is in particular, when it's like, did you do this thing? Did you do that thing? Like I had a leader at one time who used to, so this was back in the faxing days, but used to fax me to-do lists at the end of the days. And I was in a senior management position. It's like, I don't need you to tell me my to-do list. I got my to-do list. But, until we developed that trust and until, he knew that I would follow through, then that made him feel better to convey those clear expectations. But, we hire smart people, and so we need to trust them to do good things. But on the other hand, Michael, I can be a micromanager sometimes too. Like, if I'm the one whose name is on you doing that thing, then I don't care. I'm going to ask you because I need to, like, if my boss is going to ask me what's happening with that project, what's happening with where are we at in that process, then I need the tools, and I've got to have visibility. And so, but there's ways of providing or of accomplishing that visibility and accountability without that experience, that negative experience of
exactly
you don't trust me.
So, yeah, exactly.
So Michael, what are some of the ways that you've accomplished that?
Well, I mean, so Candace knows it wouldn't be a conversation amongst us if we didn't come up with a book recommendation. I don't know what's up with that, but yeah, pretty much always. Jeff Sutherland, who was a part of the Agile movement and Agile Manifesto, Jeff Sutherland wrote a book called Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, which is a brilliant, fairly thin book, but packed with really, really good stuff about Scrum and making Scrum real. And it's so pragmatic, it's based on use cases and examples and actionable items. So I kind of love books like that every now and again. And where does he really get to? Well, yes, we micromanage, but we got to create that trust. Trust is created through repetition, and rituals create repetition. This idea of being able to see the work that people are doing and see catch people doing good things, not bad things, and just kind of watching that happen in the Scrum sense is very, very powerful. Typically, as Alistair said, we don't believe that people are doing the work, and if the work is now visual and I can see it moving across the board, then that's kind of fascinating to me. I don't really need to pick at them anymore, do I? And then I say, well, I'm not sure they're working on the right things. Well, Scrum allows me of my own time to reorganize the work that's sitting in the backlog such that the most important things are at the top, and when people grab for something next, they grab from the top and away you go. So the process is helping, making sure that you're getting the right things done. So there's two things I don't need to complain about now. And the other is, how can people help each other? Well, if they know what work is there and what work they've already done, and the rituals are allowing you to have the conversation, isn't that fascinating? Management always likes to poke us and say, well, are you getting stuff done, and at what rate are you accomplishing it? When are you going to be finished this work? Well, let's hold on. Now I can see the work going. I can see the work that gets into done. I can track that work. And then by doing cumulative flow diagrams, which are associated with Scrum, I can actually forecast the amount of work that's going to get done next. I can understand the velocity of my teams. Okay, I think we're up to like 4 things I think that we've solved right now that happened just through one little construct that comes in a book that's this thin and allows your people to do it today.
Yeah, totally. We've got a question in the chat, which is awesome. Hi, Saida. Can you comment on micromanagement versus checking in on people to make sure they're okay?
I think, I like that because,
it is.
Well, you're sort of, because I think we all talk about intentionality when it comes to managing distributed teams, because it's true, you have to be intentional about everything, because, you're trying to, you want to try and create those sort of connections with people that just happen by happenstance in the office. Well, to create that in a work environment, in a distributed environment, you do have to kind of in some artificially, call someone up or check in with someone to create that conversation around, hey, how are the kids, how's family, just talk about non-work stuff. So, you put that in your calendar, talking to John today about, hey, just catching up. It sort of feels artificial,
Contrived, yeah.
and contrived in some way, but it's not. If you are genuinely, actually interested in what is going on in people's lives. So, so that is a bit of a mindset as well. If it's just tick the box, then that doesn't work. But if you actually genuinely are interested and, then want to do something with the information that comes out of that conversation, then it works. And it doesn't come across as being micromanagement. And so I think, that is, it's partly, you actually do need to care about your team. And I'm sure most people do. But I think some probably feel like they're just ticking a box. And I think that then comes across that way.
Yeah, but transparency is so key in all of this, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
It's impossible to be transparent when all you see is this much of me.
Yeah.
I'm bounded by a window on all four sides. How do you know? And so why not just be transparent? Why not just say, Candace, I'm calling because I'm concerned, or I don't know, or this isn't the way I see you working normally. I just want to know what's going on. What happened with just being transparent? I am calling to check on how much work you put out.
Yeah.
And not because I want to micromanage you, but because that's not you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I had a manager, I had a leader say to me once, I care about you and I care about this place. And I'm calling to check in on both, right? And how you're doing with this, with how you're doing with this place. So it keeps the focus on the work, but caring about you in the work.
Yeah, I think it's a good point because I find, even as a founder of an organization, certain employees of mine will sometimes ask me, "Are you okay?" And it might be just because I'm maybe not as chatty or animated as maybe as I usually am in their minds, and that I'm always impressed that they feel comfortable enough to say, "Are you okay?" Which is clearly what's going on. I just noticed a bit of a change in you, and then it's like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm fine," or "Well, yeah, I'm fine, but this thing happened, so I'm a little off my game today. It's not a big deal. It's just the way it goes." Like Candace asked me the other day about that, and there was something going on at work which was just frustrating me. It wasn't a big deal, but it was taking me away from being my usual self, whatever that is. It's hard to know sometimes.
But I mean,
but the fact that somebody had picked up on that and was comfortable enough to ask me, I think that shows the organization is in a good position, and that people feel comfortable and empowered to actually ask those questions if they see that something maybe is not normal. And so I think that's but that honestly, all these things, it starts at the very, very top of the organization. I mean, I would like to say that I'm a very open type person and I have an open door policy, and that's just the way Teamit has always been. And so I think these things filter down to the right through an organization. So so I think that's empowering people to feel comfortable to ask those sort of questions.
We are in just the last 3 minutes of our time. So it's a value that we have to
time flies.
And we said we were going to just do 45 minutes. And would you mind putting up just that final slide about some training that we have coming up? So we are very excited. I recently became a certified Agile PeopleOps coach. And as an Agile PeopleOps coach, I am certified to provide Agile PeopleOps Scrum Master training. And so this Scrum Master training is specifically targeted at HR and PeopleOps professionals. So taking principles of design thinking, principles of lean and agile, and specifically applying them to PeopleOps processes. So training and equipping anybody who's responsible for the PeopleOps function. So we know in a lot of startups, they maybe don't have an HR person yet, or just aren't at the size where they have enough. And so, you know, some of these principles of doing more, doing better, attending to those processes, and making them more efficient and more effective. And so we're running this training December 8th to 10th. We have the early bird pricing on right now. We encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions at all about the public course that we have coming up, or we also can provide this training privately as well. As Michael said, you know, in other parts of companies, we've known just the impact that Scrum can have on companies to both engage and also to increase productivity. And so I honestly, when I took the training, I was like, where was this 20 years ago when I first cut my HR teeth? Because it's transformative when we look at HR and PeopleOps processes. And so I definitely will be staying on if anybody wants to stay on and ask any questions. But in the meantime, we just thank you all for attending this session. Thank you, Michael, for showing up and having this conversation and sharing your experiences and your stories. And Alistair, it's always a privilege to do this work with you. So thanks so much, everyone, for coming.